The Miller family had recently moved into a sprawling 19th century farmhouse in Vermont, a structure wrapped in the melancholy of falling autumn leaves and ancient wooden beams that groaned under every footstep. Its long, drafty corridors and endless stairways seemed to whisper, as if the house itself remembered every secret tragedy it had ever witnessed. The centerpiece of the foyer was a massive silver-gilt mirror, an intricate mahogany frame overlaid with tarnished silver leaf that had darkened to a purplish hue over decades. The carved laurel leaves, upon closer inspection, appeared more like skeletal fingers stretching desperately toward the glass, almost yearning to reach out and touch whoever dared to approach. At first, the Millers were enchanted by it. It wasn't just a mirror, it was a statement, a relic of old-world grandeur. But within days, the house began to assert its own will. Their 7-year-old daughter, Lily, refused to use the stairs alone. "Daddy," she whispered one evening, "the other girl in the mirror, she's always behind me. She doesn't move when I move. She waits, and then she watches." David Miller, a pragmatic engineer, initially laughed it off. Antique mirrors often contained imperfections, distortions that could make reflections seem strange. But laughter turned to unease on the 10th night. One evening, David walked past the foyer to check the basement furnace. His reflection froze him in terror. The David in the mirror wasn't aligned with reality. It leaned against the opposite wall, gripping a kitchen knife he had never held. Its eyes, dark, hollow pits, radiated a hatred so visceral it pressed against his chest like a physical blow. He blinked, and the image corrected itself, but the icy air lingered. It was only the beginning. Soon, the mirror's influence extended beyond visions. Food tasted like ashes. The scent of ozone and wet earth haunted the foyer. Elena, his wife, discovered oily gray handprints forming beneath the glass, as if some imprisoned entity was trying to claw its way out. David became obsessed, hours disappearing as he stared into the mirror, convinced he could glimpse the man in gray, a towering, gaunt figure with parchment-like skin, prowling the edges of the reflections. The malevolence became physical. Furniture shifted slightly when no one was looking. Doors that had been locked would creak open. Whispers, unintelligible yet threatening, floated through the air. During a violent nor'easter, lightning fractured the sky, and the power failed, plunging the house into suffocating darkness. David approached the mirror with a kerosene lamp. The glass no longer reflected the room. It revealed a nightmarish alternate reality. The walls crawled with black mold. The floor was littered with bird bones, and the man in gray pressed against the surface, his elongated fingers scratching a screeching rhythm that echoed through the empty rooms. Desperation drove David to strike the mirror with a brass fire poker. The glass didn't shatter, it bruised. Dark purple welts appeared where the metal hit. The family realized they were facing a force that defied the laws of nature. Specialists were called, iron-lined crates filled with consecrated salt encasing the mirror before it was buried in an unmarked field. Yet even buried, the mirror's influence persisted. Nights were plagued by the memory of hollow eyes, the icy air, and whispers that seemed to echo from nowhere. The Millers now live in a home devoid of reflective surfaces, terrified that even a puddle of rain could allow the man in gray to step through. Their lives, once ordinary, became shadows of vigilance and fear. Every fleeting reflection, every glimmer of silver, now sends shivers down their spines. The mirror may be buried, but its malice endures, a chilling reminder that some objects are more than they seem. They are vessels of ancient, intelligent evil, waiting silently to be noticed, to be feared, and to act. The Harrison family had always considered themselves collectors of unusual antiques, but nothing prepared them for the chilling inheritance that arrived one snowy winter morning in 1994. Toby Harrison, a bright-eyed 5-year-old, received a gift from a distant relative, a 19th-century harlequin automaton. At first glance, it seemed like a perfectly ordinary collectible, a mechanical doll with exquisitely painted porcelain features, a permanent mocking smirk, and violet-tinted glass eyes that reflected the room with uncanny clarity. Its body, carved from polished cherry wood, was adorned with painted ruffles and intricate details, and at the back a heavy iron key promised movement, music, and laughter. But the harlequin was no ordinary doll. From the first night in Toby's nursery, subtle disturbances began. Toys rearranged themselves into patterns that made no sense, angles that seemed to suggest a hierarchy of fear. Toby became unnaturally quiet, spending hours sitting cross-legged, staring upward at the shelf where the doll perched. "The Smiler is watching," he whispered one evening, his small fingers tracing circles in the air, as if following invisible lines of command. His parents, Mark and Sarah, initially dismissed this as the overactive imagination of a lonely child, yet the sense of dread that settled over the nursery was impossible to ignore. By the third night, the family dog, a gentle golden retriever named Baxter, refused to enter the upstairs hallway. It would whine at the base of the stairs, hack its throat as though choking, and retreat in terror. When Mark checked on him the next morning, he discovered 3 deep, precise incisions along the dog's flank, identical in size and spacing to the harlequin's delicate porcelain fingers. The doll sat on the high shelf, its violet eyes catching the morning light, unmoved, as though mocking them silently. Every night at precisely 3:13 a.m., the mechanical music box built into the harlequin's chest would play. It was no longer the frantic, dissonant tune of the day before. The melody had shifted into a grinding, rhythmic cadence, mimicking a human scream trying to escape a throat constricted by iron chains. Shadows in the nursery seemed to twitch with the rhythm, elongating and writhing unnaturally. Toby's toys, once objects of innocence, became symbols of obedience. Their positions in the room seemed dictated by some dark, unseen force. Sarah noticed the first signs of psychological strain. Toby spoke to the doll in hushed tones, reporting its demands as if he were a scribe to a cruel, otherworldly monarch. "The Smiler says if the toys look, bad things will happen. I must watch for them," he murmured, eyes wide, trembling, yet eerily composed. The doll itself began appearing in different parts of the house, always in places when no one had set it down, in the kitchen, the shower, the dining room, its violet eyes glinting, porcelain jaw slightly ajar. The crescendo of terror came on a frigid winter night when Toby was discovered beneath the nursery ceiling. He had climbed onto the top of his wardrobe, his small hands gripping the edges, muttering instructions to the harlequin. As Mark and Sarah rushed to intervene, the doll fell from the shelf, but instead of shattering, it landed on its feet, staring up at the adults with a malevolent intelligence that no toy should possess. Its jaw opened unnaturally, revealing a row of tiny rusted iron needles, aligned like fangs, ready to strike. The family realized the doll's threat was both psychological and physical. Attempts to destroy it were futile. Fire consumed the harlequin, yet from the flames came an unholy roar, a sound that vibrated through the walls and floorboards, echoing the pain and fury of whatever malevolent force animated it. Toby's nights became tormented. Even as a teenager, he would awaken at 3:13 a.m.,
feeling the weight of a porcelain hand pressing against his throat. He could never shake the feeling that the harlequin's eyes were always upon him, observing, waiting for disobedience, and ready to punish. The doll had embedded itself into the family's psyche, a permanent predator hidden in plain sight. Its dissonant melody haunted every room, its violet gaze permeated every shadow, and Toby's childhood innocence was irreversibly consumed by the presence of a toy that should have brought joy, but instead delivered relentless terror.
Julian Vance, a professional photographer renowned for capturing the decay of urban life, prided himself on seeing the world through a lens no one else could understand. His eyes were trained to notice the subtle rot, the hidden fractures, the fleeting shadows in city streets. But Julian's obsession with rare and antique photographic equipment led him down a path from curiosity to unspeakable horror. On a dreary winter day in 2024, during an aimless excursion through a derelict flea market on the outskirts of Berlin, Julian discovered a camera that would irrevocably alter his existence. It was a 1950s rangefinder, its body encased in black leather that felt almost disturbingly organic, like cured human skin. The lens was a void, absorbing every drop of light, reflecting none back, as if it were a window into nothingness itself. The vendor, an old man with a scarred and pitted face, pressed the camera into Julian's hands. "It doesn't take pictures," he rasped, voice cracked like gravel. "It collects debts. Every click is a signature on a contract you didn't read." Julian laughed nervously and handed over the euros, his imagination tingling with the thrill of rarity. Back in New Orleans, Julian's first attempt to use the camera seemed ordinary. Yet, when developing the film, anomalies appeared. Every 36 exposure roll produced a 37th frame, showing places Julian had never visited: a desolate basement in a foreign city, a rusted cemetery gate under the moonlight, a distorted angle of his own front door. The shadows in these images were not vague. They were distinctly humanoid, faceless figures draped in tattered black shrouds, looming ever closer with each successive frame. Soon, Julian noticed manifestations outside the photographs. Friends and subjects he had recently photographed began to suffer gruesome fates. Harlan Reed, his mentor, was found dead, his throat and lungs filled with swarms of black, moth-like insects. Julian began to feel the symbiotic malevolence of the camera. It was no longer just an observer, it was a harbinger, predetermining tragic outcomes and dragging them into reality. Sleep eluded him as the camera's shutter clicked ceaselessly in the corner of his room. Each click echoed like a ticking clock, counting down to inevitable decay. He attempted to lock it in a lead-lined safe. The next morning, it would be perched on his desk, pointing directly at him. Every photo he developed revealed not just decay, but a creeping intimacy with death. Babies in cradles with shriveled, ancient corpses beside them, parks filled with mass graves of plague victims, and in his final 37th frame, a self-portrait showing his chest hollowed out to reveal a rusted winding mechanism, and the faceless figure directly behind him, hand on his shoulder. Desperate, he tried to destroy the camera, smashing it with a sledgehammer, throwing it into the Mississippi, yet it returned, untouched and warm.
His vision deteriorated, his optic nerves withered, leaving him blind, yet he could feel the camera, hear the mechanical breathing from its leather-wrapped body, and understand that it would continue documenting his decline. Now, Julian exists in perpetual darkness, a captive to an instrument of fate, knowing every photograph is a signed contract of doom that can never be broken. The black lens viewfinder had consumed his life, his sight, his sanity, and now the only thing remaining was its silent, omniscient observation, waiting for the final frame to claim the last vestiges of Julian Vance.
Mark and Elena, a young couple seeking a fresh start in London, moved into a seemingly charming flat in Highgate. The building, steeped in Victorian character, promised cozy rooms, high ceilings, and a quaint sense of history. Their landlord, however, gave them a warning that seemed almost perfunctory at the time. A massive black oak wardrobe in the master bedroom must never be locked. The couple laughed it off, imagining a quirky antique, a centerpiece carved with exquisite skill. The intricate carvings depicted a silent harvest, figures in long robes bending over fields of hair-like strands frozen in the midst of reaping. To Mark and Elena, it was art, a conversation piece, nothing more. Within days of moving in, subtle changes began to take hold. The air in the master bedroom felt heavier, almost viscous, pressing against their skin. The joyous energy of the couple's new home seemed to drain away. Laughter became rare, conversation grew sparse, and a silent unease lingered in every corner. Elena began experiencing what she later described as the compression, a sensation that the walls themselves leaned in, shifting imperceptibly, pressing the room ever closer to the wardrobe. Even when the doors were open, the object seemed to draw all attention and energy toward itself. Mark found his mind inexplicably drawn to it, standing for hours with his forehead pressed against the cold, dark wood, unable to pull away. The wardrobe seemed alive, aware, almost sentient, exuding a gravitational pull that weighed on the very air they breathed. As the days passed, auditory hallucinations began to manifest. At first, subtle, barely discernible hums vibrating in their teeth, low and multitonal, almost beneath conscious hearing. The hums grew louder, forming whispered syllables that sounded human but defied comprehension, words shaped by some alien logic. Elena sometimes awoke to find herself kneeling before the wardrobe in a half-dream state, compelled by a force she could not resist. Mark began to dream vividly of the carvings moving, the silent harvest coming alive in pale, spectral motion. Shadowy figures swung silently from the internal racks of the wardrobe, their translucent forms writhing in a void that seemed to stretch into infinity. By the third night, the wardrobe escalated its terror. The doors opened of their own accord, revealing an interior that defied all physical laws. It was no longer a storage space, but a cavernous abyss, a place where light refused to enter, and where pale, ghostly figures hung like coats, suspended in eternal torment. Mark, mesmerized, reached his hand into the void. He could feel the cold, wet resistance, as if the darkness itself were alive, testing his curiosity and feeding on it. Elena tried to pull him back, but the wardrobe seemed to react, its air growing thick, almost viscous, pressing against them both with the weight of unseen hands.
For the next nights, the wardrobe became a predator, hunting them with slow, relentless intent. Every blink, every hesitation brought it imperceptibly closer to their bed. The black resin from the carvings oozed onto the floor, burning their feet through the thin carpet, releasing a pungent, metallic scent that filled the room. A high-pitched, ear-splitting scream erupted at random intervals, audible only to Mark and Elena, reverberating through their skulls and shattering sleep. Attempts to flee the flat proved nearly impossible. The air seemed to resist movement, thickening as they crossed each threshold. The psychological toll was relentless. Elena began seeing fleeting shapes in the corners of her vision, pale faces twisted in silent screams. Mark suffered from intense nightmares, waking in cold sweats with the impression of unseen hands clutching his shoulders. The wardrobe's influence extended beyond the room, seeping into the hallways and living areas. Even their attempts to ignore it were futile. Objects shifted slightly when unobserved, shadows danced in unnatural patterns, and the oppressive weight of anticipation made the air itself feel alive. Finally, after several nights of torment, Mark and Elena fled the flat with nothing but the clothes on their backs, leaving behind all possessions. The landlord later returned, entering the master bedroom with casual curiosity. The wardrobe remained perfectly centered in the room, untouched by human interference. Opening it revealed a horrifying tableau. Mark and Elena's wedding photos, faces meticulously cut out, pinned to the back wall. The silent harvest carvings seemed to pulse subtly, exuding a faint black resin that glimmered in the dim light like congealed shadow. It became clear that the wardrobe was not a piece of furniture, but a predator, a sentient object that fed on the dreams, joys, and vitality of those who came near it. The wardrobe's malevolence is absolute, a dark testament to the notion that objects can harbor evil intent, a horror not of ghosts, but of patient, unrelenting, and intelligent malevolence.